What if I told you that while millions died in the flames of the Second World War, a select group of financial elites were busy transforming global catastrophe into personal fortune? Welcome to the shadowy world where power, money, and global conflict intersect. I'm about to take you on a journey that most history books have conveniently forgotten. Today we expose the bankers who orchestrated financial empires amid the ruins of civilization, the men who turned the chaos of war into the opportunity of a lifetime. Before we dive in, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't just another war story. This is about a financial battlefield that operated parallel to the military one. A battlefield where the weapons were currencies, loans, and gold reserves. While young men fought and died in trenches, boardrooms across the world hosted a different kind of warfare, one that would reshape global finance for generations to come. Every great fortune begins with foresight. The bankers who would eventually profit from World War II didn't suddenly appear when the bombs started falling. Their preparation began years earlier. The Great Depression had already taught a brutal lesson to the financial elite. Crisis creates opportunity, and nothing creates a crisis like war. Take Thomas McKittrick, the American who became president of the Bank for International Settlements in 1940. The BIS was originally established to handle German reparations from World War I, but under McKittrick's guidance, it would serve a far more controversial purpose. Located in Basel, Switzerland, the BIS maintained its neutrality while facilitating transactions between Allied and Axis powers throughout the entire war. Yes, you heard that correctly, a bank that served both sides. McKittrick wasn't just any banker. He had connections to Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and German industrialists. When most people were choosing sides, he was positioning himself at the crossroads where enemy money would inevitably flow. But McKittrick wasn't alone in his foresight. Swiss bankers had already begun preparing their vaults for the flood of wealth that would seek shelter from the coming storm. Adolf Jahn of Swiss Bank Corporation expanded his institution's capacity for gold storage in the late 1930s. Was this just good business planning, or did he know something the public didn't? What if the real war profiteers weren't the obvious weapons manufacturers, but the quiet men in suits who financed both sides of the conflict? The evidence suggests exactly that. Switzerland, a peaceful oasis surrounded by a continent in flames. Its famous neutrality wasn't just a political position, it was perhaps history's most profitable business model. Throughout the war, Switzerland's banks accepted gold from Nazi Germany. Gold that we now know came from conquered central banks, private citizens, and even the dental fillings of concentration camp victims. The scale is staggering. By some estimates, the Nazis deposited gold worth over $400 million in 1940s values, billions in today's money, into Swiss banks. These transactions allowed Germany to purchase vital war materials from neutral countries when they were otherwise blockaded. Men like Robert Fenninger of Credit Suisse and Albert Nussbaumer of Union Bank of Switzerland oversaw institutions that swelled with wartime deposits. Their personal wealth grew accordingly. Swiss banking profits increased by an average of 93% between 1939 and 1945. Think about that. While most of the world's economies were being devastated, Swiss banks nearly doubled their profits. But here's where our story gets even more intriguing. Switzerland wasn't the only neutral profit center. Sweden, Spain, Portugal, and Argentina all played similar roles, creating wealth for bankers who knew how to navigate the moral gray zones of wartime finance. The Wallenberg family of Sweden, through their Enskilda Bank, maintained relationships with both German businesses and Allied interests. Their bank facilitated the famous ball-bearing exports to Germany, components essential for the Nazi war machine, while simultaneously maintaining ties with Allied financial institutions. Jacob Wallenberg didn't just survive the war. He positioned his family's financial empire to emerge stronger than ever. The Wallenbergs today control companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars. I want you to consider something. What does it mean when the same banking families, who profited from financing both sides of World War II, still control vast financial empires today? Is this the invisible hand of history that textbooks don't teach us about? While Europe burned, America's financial district experienced a remarkable transformation. After a decade of depression, Wall Street was suddenly flush with opportunity, if you knew where to look. Let's talk about Prescott Bush, father and grandfather to future presidents. As director of the Union Banking Corporation, Bush represented American investment in German industry, right up until the U.S. government seized the bank in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act. The UBC wasn't just any bank, it was a financial instrument of Fritz Thyssen, one of Hitler's earliest financial backers. Through complex corporate structures, American investment flowed into Nazi Germany, even as the two nations moved toward war. When war finally came to America, many of these banking relationships didn't end. They just went underground or operated through neutral intermediaries like those Swiss banks we discussed earlier. Even more shocking was the operation of American banks in occupied France. Chase Bank's Paris branch remained open throughout the Nazi occupation, serving German clients and the Vichy government. The bank's leadership, including members of the Rockefeller family who controlled Chase, allowed their European operations to collaborate with the occupation. After the war, Chase's French operations were investigated for collaboration, but the New York headquarters maintained sufficient distance to avoid serious consequences. Meanwhile, the bank's international position had been strengthened. Look at these growth charts. While European financial institutions lay in ruins by 1945, American banks had doubled and tripled in size. They were positioned to dominate the post-war financial order through the Bretton Woods system. The question we should all be asking is not just who profited, but who planned to profit. Was war itself viewed as just another market cycle by those with enough power and foresight to position themselves accordingly? Gold. For centuries, it has been humanity's ultimate store of value. During World War II, it became something else, the portable, untraceable, and universal currency of desperation and devastation. As Nazi persecution intensified, Jewish families and others targeted by the regime liquidated businesses, homes, and heirlooms built over generations, often for pennies on the dollar. The wealth of entire communities was condensed into whatever gold and valuables people could carry. The Nazi regime systematically looted the wealth of conquered territories and persecuted populations. Central bank gold reserves from Austria, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France were seized. Personal jewelry, religious artifacts, even dental gold was collected and melted down. This gold needed to be laundered, transformed from the evidence of crimes against humanity into neutral financial instruments. That's where certain bankers entered the picture. Emil Pohl, vice president of the Nazi Reichsbank, worked directly with Swiss banker Ernst Weber, president of the Swiss National Bank, to establish a system for converting looted gold into Swiss francs. Between 1939 and 1945, Germany deposited gold worth over 1.6 billion Swiss francs into Swiss banks. The bankers didn't ask too many questions about those unmarked gold bars with unusual assay marks. Think about this for a moment. Gold fillings ripped from the mouths of concentration camp victims were melted down, combined with looted central bank gold, and deposited in Swiss vaults, where they were credited to Nazi accounts and converted to currencies used to buy war materials. After the war, these transactions became the subject of intense investigation. But by then, most of the gold had disappeared into the global financial system, and most of the bankers who facilitated these transactions faced minimal consequences. Thomas McKittrick of the BIS, who we mentioned earlier, actually worked with the Allies to shield Swiss banks from the most serious consequences. After all, many powerful American and British banking interests had their own relationships with these same institutions. The gold trade of World War II represents one of history's greatest transfers of wealth, from the victims of aggression to the financial facilitators who operated in the shadows. And many of today's great banking fortunes have their roots in this dark soil. In July 1944, as the war still raged in Europe and the Pacific, 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations gathered at a resort in New Hampshire. Their task: design the post-war financial system. The key architects were British economist John Maynard Keynes and American Treasury official Harry Dexter White. But behind them stood the banking interests that had not only survived the war, but thrived during it. The Bretton Woods system established the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, created the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and positioned New York as the new center of global finance, replacing London. This wasn't just diplomatic happenstance. It was the culmination of decades of financial maneuvering, accelerated by the war's destruction of competing financial centers in Europe. The groundwork had been laid decades earlier by banking families like the Warburgs, Rockefellers, and Morgans, who had established the Federal Reserve System in 1913. World War II simply provided the opportunity to expand their system globally. The bankers who had maintained connections on both sides during the war were perfectly positioned to broker the peace. They understood all parties' financial positions, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Many of them served as advisors to their governments during the Bretton Woods negotiations. Men like Winthrop Aldrich of Chase Bank and brother-in-law to John D. Rockefeller, Jr., represented powerful banking interests at Bretton Woods. The resulting system would serve those interests for decades to come. I want you to consider something remarkable. The bankers whose institutions had financed fascism, communism, and democracy alike were now writing the rules for the post-war world. Is it any wonder that the system they created allowed unprecedented banking expansion? Let me introduce you to some of the banking dynasties whose modern fortunes were either created or dramatically enhanced during the chaos of World War II. The Rothschild family, already legendary in banking circles, faced devastation of their continental operations during Nazi occupation. Yet the family's British and American branches not only survived, but expanded. By helping Allied governments mobilize financial resources, they strengthened their position in post-war Europe. Edmund Rothschild, who would later found his own banking group, learned financial lessons during the war that would help him build a banking empire worth billions in the decades that followed. Then there's the Wallenberg family of Sweden, whom we mentioned earlier. Their Enskilda Bank's wartime activities set the stage for their control of up to 40% of Sweden's stock market capitalization today. The family now controls interests in giants like Ericsson, Saab, ABB, and AstraZeneca. Their wartime ability to maintain relationships with both Axis and Allied interests translated into post-war industrial dominance. The House of Morgan had financed Allied purchases during both world wars, earning enormous fees. The bank's partners became some of America's wealthiest men, and Morgan's post-war position as a leading international bank was secured. These weren't just wealthy individuals. They were the architects of financial dynasties that continue to shape our world today. The lessons they learned during World War II about how to protect and multiply wealth during global crises became the foundation of modern banking strategies. Look closely at more recent financial crises, 2008, the European debt crisis, the pandemic response, and you'll see the same patterns. Financial elites are positioned to benefit from systemic shocks while the public bears the cost. This isn't a coincidence. It's the application of wartime financial lessons to peacetime economies. The question is, are we still fighting yesterday's war while a new financial battleground emerges around us? The true legacy of World War II banking isn't found in history books. It's embedded in the very structure of our financial system. The unprecedented concentration of banking power we see today began during those war years. When European banks collapsed under occupation, their assets, client relationships, and market positions were absorbed by the survivors, primarily American and Swiss institutions. This consolidation never reversed. Instead, it accelerated in the decades following the war. Today's banking behemoths, too big to fail, too powerful to regulate effectively, are the direct descendants of this wartime consolidation. But there's something even more profound at work. The wartime bankers demonstrated that traditional national loyalties were secondary to financial interest. They created the first truly global financial network that transcended borders, ideologies, and conflicts. Today's instantaneous movement of capital across borders, the ability of wealth to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, the complex web of offshore financial centers, all of these defining features of modern finance evolved from wartime banking innovations. Swiss numbered accounts, Liechtenstein foundations, Caribbean trusts. These wealth protection vehicles gained prominence during and immediately after the war as ways to obscure ownership and protect assets from both taxation and expropriation. The bankers of World War II. I didn't just get rich, they rewrote the rules of global finance, and we're still playing by their rulebook, so what can we learn from the bankers who thrived during history's greatest catastrophe? How can their strategies inform your financial decisions today? First, geographic diversification remains essential. The wartime bankers never kept all their assets in one jurisdiction. Swiss accounts, American investments, British insurance policies, their wealth was strategically distributed to survive the fall of any single market or nation. Second, they understood the enduring value of tangible assets. While currencies collapsed and governments fell, gold, art, land, and industrial capacity retained intrinsic value. The modern equivalent might include precious metals, strategic real estate, and ownership in essential industries. Third, they maintained relationship networks that transcended political boundaries. Information and connection were often more valuable than any single investment. In today's world, this means building your own network of trusted advisors and information sources outside mainstream channels. But there's a crucial difference between then and now. The banking secrecy that enabled much of this wartime wealth protection has been systematically dismantled. Today's financial system is more transparent and interconnected than ever before. This means that legitimate wealth protection requires more sophisticated approaches and a clear ethical foundation that the wartime bankers often lacked. The good news is that history provides a roadmap. By studying how wealth survived and even thrived during history's greatest calamity, we can better prepare for whatever financial challenges lie ahead. As we conclude our journey through this hidden chapter of financial history, I want you to consider a profound question. In any global crisis, there are winners and losers. Which will you be when the next crisis arrives? The bankers of World War II made their choice. They saw opportunity in chaos. They transcended national boundaries when nations were at each other's throats. They built systems that survived the collapse of governments and currencies. Many of the names we've discussed today remain fixtures of global finance. Their descendants manage hedge funds, lead investment banks, and advise governments. The institutions they built continue to shape our financial landscape. The most important lesson may be this. While most people were focused on the daily headlines of battle and political upheaval, these financial architects were quietly positioning themselves for the post-war world, a world they helped design. Today, as we face our own cascading global crises, pandemic, climate change, technological disruption, political polarization, the same question confronts us. Are we merely reacting to events, or are we positioning ourselves for the world that will emerge from these transformations? The bankers who became rich during World War II weren't just lucky. They weren't just opportunistic. They were strategic. They thought decades ahead while others could barely plan beyond the next day. That capacity for long-term thinking amid short-term chaos remains the ultimate financial advantage, in war, in peace, and in whatever uncertain future awaits us all. If you found value in this exploration of hidden financial history, make sure to subscribe for our upcoming documentary, The Shadow Banking System: Who Really Controls Global Finance?